It was 4:17 in the morning on the 22nd of December, 1944. The cold over Bastogne hung like iron. It pressed into the earth. It pressed into the bones. It pressed into the wounded who lay beneath the ruined town in a dugout lit by a single oil lamp that flickered as if fighting for its own life. Anna Keller leaned forward into that trembling light. She was 27, a nurse trained in a quiet hospital far from the front. But nothing in her training spoke of this place or this hour. Nothing had prepared her for the way war turned time into something slow, heavy, and sharp. A young paratrooper lay on the wooden table before her. His breath shook as it left his chest. A thin line of blood darkened the cloth wrapped around his abdomen. The wound was deep. The bleeding was steady. Steam rose from his skin in soft white ghosts that dissolved into the cold air of the dugout. Anna reached for the last glass syringe the battalion had. She turned it slowly and watched the final drops of morphine cling to the inside like a memory trying not to fade. Her fingers ached from the cold. She forced them to move. The dugout was narrow. The walls were wet. Melted snow dripped through timber beams and fell onto the dirt floor with soft taps that marked the passage of seconds. Above ground, German artillery whispered through the morning darkness. The explosions were far for now. But in Bastogne, far had no meaning. Everything struck close. Anna glanced at a small tin box beside her. It was open, empty. It had once held neat rows of catgut sutures. Strong, reliable, sterile. Now there was nothing inside. She had checked it 3 times through the night, hoping the emptiness might somehow change. It did not. She looked at the wound and knew the truth. Without sutures, she could only close it with cloth. Cloth that would swell. Cloth that would absorb blood. Cloth that would loosen. Cloth that would fail. The paratrooper reached for her wrist. His hand trembled and then fell. His eyes closed. She whispered to him that she would not leave him. Her voice sounded small in the cold. The lamp hissed. The dugout shivered as another shell struck somewhere above. Anna felt the rhythm of the bombardment. Slow, constant, heavy. She listened to it and felt the weight of the hours to come. She did not know that before the next sunset, she would hold a thread no one had intended for healing. A thread made not for saving lives, but for securing gear on the uniforms of the enemy. A thread that would decide the fate of the men lying before her. A thread she had no right to use and every reason to fear. War is often shaped by machines, orders, and grand maneuvers. But on that frozen morning, in a dugout lit by a dying lamp, history rested in something smaller. Something thin as a strand of hair. Something that should never have been used at all. The last thread. Bastogne had become a trap of snow and fire. The Germans had sealed every road. Storms closed the sky. The 101st Airborne was surrounded with no promise of escape and no guarantee of survival. Inside the medical dugout, the war took a different shape. There were no rifles, no bayonets, no roaring engines, only the steady hum of suffering. The air smelled of blood, sweat, and cold earth. It clung to skin and memory alike. Supplies vanished quickly. The first to go were clean bandages, then morphine, then antiseptic. Every day, something else disappeared. At first, sutures were counted carefully. Every strand was precious. Every strand was measured against the number of wounded expected. But the numbers blurred by the 3rd day. Too many wounded. Too little of everything else. By the 5th day, the sutures were gone. The surgeons tore thin strips from clean cloth. They boiled them. They tied them. They hoped the makeshift threads would hold. Sometimes they did. Often they did not. A wound that opened a second time brought fever. Fever brought infection. Infection brought a kind of quiet death that crept through the dugout, without sound or mercy. Anna saw it before anyone else. She was the one who changed the bandages. She was the one who cleaned the reopened wounds. She was the one who held the men as their breathing slowed and their eyes clouded. She noticed how the cloth threads swelled when soaked in blood. She saw how they loosened. She saw how they tore from the flesh they were supposed to hold. She felt how the edges of wounds stayed soft instead of tightening as they should. The manuals warned against improvisation. They insisted on approved materials. They spoke of protocols and safety. But the manuals had never been written for a place like this. A place where fire and ice met. Where days felt like years. Where a single strand of catgut held more value than a crate of rifles. The surgeons were too exhausted to argue with the manuals. They followed them because following rules gave structure to chaos. Because rules were the only thing left that resembled normal life. But Anna saw the crack. The crack in the system. The crack in the rules. The crack that grew wider with each wounded man carried into her arms. The war was changing the shape of everything. Even the smallest truth. And the truth was simple. Without real sutures, the dugout was becoming a place where men died not from their wounds but from the failure of a thread. The truth did not arrive all at once. It came in quiet moments. Moments when Anna cleaned a wound and found the edges raw again. Moments when a fever rose hours after she had tied a cloth thread. Moments when she examined the improvised sutures and saw the damage they caused. She studied them the way a mechanic studies a broken part. She rubbed the strands between her fingers. She felt the way they softened when wet. She watched how the fibers separated under tension. It was simple physics. Cloth absorbed moisture. The fibers expanded. Knots loosened. Edges reopened. Infection followed. Catgut behaved differently. It tightened. It held fast. It resisted swelling. It created a seal the body could trust. Anna spoke quietly to one of the surgeons during a brief pause in the chaos. "The problem is not our hands," she said. "The problem is the thread itself." He listened with empty eyes. Then he nodded. He knew she was right. But he also knew they had no alternatives. She kept studying the wounds. She kept searching for a solution. But nothing in the dugout resembled the material they needed. Every time she closed a wound with cloth, she memorized the feeling. The sensation of the knot slipping. The texture of the fibers fighting her grip. The subtle change in tension that signaled failure before it even happened. She began to time the fever. She learned how long it took for infection to show. She counted the hours for each patient. Some men lasted 2 days. Some only 1. A few did not survive the night. Each loss built a quiet pressure inside her. Not anger. Not despair. Something colder. A calm that formed when the world outside shrank to a single problem. A thread. A line. A connection between life and death. She found herself staring at the empty suture box longer than she meant to. She traced its edges with her thumb. She remembered the feel of real sutures in her hands. The clean pull. The small sound they made as they tightened. The confidence they carried. She whispered to herself that she would find a way. No one heard her. No one needed to. She knew the truth now. The battle inside the dugout was not against blood or shrapnel or cold. It was against material. Against the absence of something small. Against the failure of the tools meant to save lives. War had turned that small failure into a killer. And Anna Keller refused to let it win. The moment arrived without warning. A group of wounded German prisoners was brought into the dugout under guard. Mud covered their boots. Blood darkened their coats. They were enemies by uniform, but victims by wound. Anna treated them with the same steady care she gave her own. War did not change her sense of duty. While checking their pockets for identification, she found it. A small coil of thin paratrooper cord. German nylon. Smooth. Strong. Cold under her fingers. She tugged gently on the cord. It resisted. It did not fray. It did not weaken. It felt like something alive. An idea rose inside her. A dangerous, forbidden idea. This could be thread. She took the cord to the chief surgeon. He listened in silence as she explained. His face remained expressionless. Then he spoke. "You know the regulations. No enemy material. No untested thread. If you go through with this, you stand alone." She held the cord in her hand. She looked at the wounded around her. She looked at the empty suture box. There was no choice to make. Only a truth to accept. She returned to the corner of the dugout, where the lamp burned low. She boiled snow in an old kettle. She cut the cord with a scalpel. She pulled it apart strand by strand. Steam rose around her as the strands twisted in the heat. She lowered them into the boiling water. She watched the fibers soften slightly and then settle into stillness. She lifted them out and laid them across a clean cloth near the lamp. Her hands worked calmly. Her breathing stayed level. Her face was set in a quiet line of resolve. The other medics watched from the shadows. No one spoke. They understood what she was doing. They also understood the risk. This was not improvisation. This was defiance. Defiance of rules. Defiance of manuals. Defiance of fear. When she finished preparing the strands, she sat for a moment and let her hands rest on the table. Her fingers twitched from overuse. Her nails were cracked. Her knuckles cold. She whispered to herself, "If this works, they will live. If it fails, I will carry it forever." Her voice was almost lost in the sound of distant shellfire. But the thread lay before her. Silent. Ready. A line drawn by an enemy, now meant to save her own. The bombardment returned in the afternoon with a fury that shook the dugout. Earth fell from the ceiling. Lights flickered. The air vibrated with each blast. The wounded came in waves. Anna moved between the tables with steady urgency. Her breath turned white in the freezing air. She wiped frost from her eyelashes with the back of her wrist. Then they carried in the young paratrooper, barely older than 20. His abdomen torn open by shrapnel. Blood pooled beneath him. His skin was pale and cold. The surgeon looked at the wound and knew they had minutes. Not hours. Minutes. He prepared the incision. Anna stood ready. The nylon strands lay on the cloth beside her. The surgeon found the ruptured vessel. Blood pulsed out with each fading heartbeat. He pressed his fingers against it to slow the flow. Anna threaded the needle. The nylon resisted, then slid through with a soft hiss. Her hands trembled, but she forced them steady. She brought the needle down. Then the dugout shook as a shell detonated above them. The lamp flickered. Dust rained down. Her needle slipped a fraction of an inch. She inhaled slowly. She pressed her feet into the ground. She found her rhythm again. The first stitch pierced flesh. The nylon followed without swelling. It held firm. Anna pulled gently until the edges met. The surgeon glanced at her. There was no approval in his eyes. No fear. Only trust. She made the second stitch. Then the third. Then the fourth. The blood slowed. Then stopped. The paratrooper gasped. His body arched in pain. Then he sagged back onto the table and breathed. He breathed. Anna did not have time to feel relief. More wounded waited. She moved to the next table. A leg wound. A torn arm. A chest wound that refused to stay closed. 11 men passed through her hands in that long, freezing afternoon. 11 times she threaded the needle. 11 times the forbidden nylon tightened and held. The dugout became a world of cold breath, dim light, and the soft sound of nylon sliding through flesh. Each stitch defied regulation. Each knot challenged the code she had been taught. Each life saved whispered the same truth. A rule is only righteous when it protects life. When it threatens life, it becomes something else. By the time the shelling slowed, Anna's fingers were numb. The skin had split along her knuckles. The dried blood on her hands belonged to many men. Her breath came in long, shaky clouds. The last soldier she treated reached for her hand. He could barely speak. "Thank you," he whispered. She nodded. She did not trust her voice. Behind her, the surgeon stood in silence. He looked at the empty suture box. He looked at the nylon threads, now stained with the memories of battle. He looked at the men who still breathed. He said one sentence. "You did what had to be done." Anna cleaned the tools. She wiped the table. She sat on a wooden crate and let the silence fill her lungs. Outside, the war continued. Inside the dugout, 11 men lived who would have died without the forbidden thread. A thread that had never been meant for healing. But war often reshapes purpose in ways no manual can foresee. When the siege broke, Bastogne felt unreal. There was light again, noise again, movement again, but the dugout remained a pocket of stillness. The inspection team arrived with clean uniforms and cold eyes. They moved through the space with clipboards and quiet voices. They asked questions that belonged to another world. A world without snow falling through the roof. A world without men dying on wooden tables. A world where regulations lived untouched by reality. They found the nylon remnants. They found the small wooden box. They found the notes Anna had taken on each patient. They called her in for questioning. She stood before them with her hands clasped to hide the cracks and cuts. They asked why she did not wait for resupply. She told them resupply would not arrive in time. They asked why she used enemy material. She told them material was not an enemy, only men were. They asked why she ignored medical code. She told them life was the highest code. They wrote her words down as if they were items on an inventory list. Cold, precise, detached. The chief surgeon attempted to defend her. He spoke quietly. He spoke with weight. He spoke with the authority of a man who had watched life and death play out at arm's length. But the officials did not want stories. They wanted order. They wanted boxes checked. They wanted rules kept clean and untouched by the mud of Bastogne. Days later, the final report returned. A single line sat at the bottom. Use of non-standard materials observed. Further use not recommended. No mention of the lives saved. No mention of the conditions. No mention of the courage required to defy the cold logic of paper. Anna placed the report aside. She opened the small wooden box. Inside lay one remaining strand of nylon, pale and thin. A relic of a choice made in darkness. A reminder of the cost. She slipped the box into her coat pocket. She left the dugout without looking back. There was no ceremony, no applause, no recognition. Only the quiet truth that the men who walked away from Bastogne carried her work in their flesh and in their lives. War rarely honors those who save rather than destroy. But their impact endures all the same. Years passed. The war ended. Winter melted into seasons that came and went. Anna returned to a quieter life. She worked in small hospitals. She raised children. She rarely spoke of Bastogne. The wooden box remained in a drawer. She opened it only once a year. She would touch the nylon strand and close the box again. She never explained why. In 1953, a series of medical papers praised the emergence of synthetic nylon sutures. They were stronger than catgut, more resistant to infection, easier to sterilize, better suited for battlefield medicine. One report noted that the earliest uses of nylon in emergency combat surgery had been observed during the winter of 1944 at unnamed frontline stations. Unnamed, but some names were known to the men who lived because of her. A few of them found her years later. They arrived at her door with slow steps and warm eyes. They brought stories from Bastogne. They brought families. They brought gratitude. They told her that the scars she had stitched had held perfectly for decades. They told her that they had lived long enough to see children, then grandchildren. They told her that a single forbidden thread had given them a lifetime. They called it the Keller thread, not a medical term, not an official designation, just a whisper of respect passed from one man to another. Anna Keller died quietly in her old age. No medals on her wall, no framed commendations, no written accounts of her defiance. But somewhere, in the bodies of men who once lay on wooden tables in a frozen dugout, her legacy lived in the strength of a stitch that refused to fail. History often celebrates the ones who give orders. But sometimes history is shaped by hands that act without permission. Hands that choose life in the face of rules. Hands that hold the last thread when the world breaks around them. Anna Keller was one of those hands. And the thread she used, taken from the enemy, purified by fire and resolve, became the lifeline of men who carried her courage far beyond the snow of Bastogne. The last thread, the quiet miracle of a nurse who refused to let death claim what her hands could still save.